Hey folks, if you're just joining us, we're going to let people come in and we'll get going a couple minutes past 10 and get going at that point in time. And welcome. Good morning, Michael. Good to see some names here. I'm really happy to welcome a variety of folks from across the North Country and the Adirondacks. If you're just jumping on, we'll be getting going in about a couple minutes. Excellent. Lake Placid representing. I see Liz Thorndike is here. Welcome. Doug Klein. Brendan Wiltsey. Excellent. Just going to give folks about one more minute and then we'll get going. We've got a jam-packed panel today, so I want to get going right away. Just one more minute. Okay, so welcome everybody to the Adirondack Research Council's spring webinar series. We've been doing webinar series really since the beginning of the pandemic, and they've been remarkably successful for us. We're really pleased. My name is Stephen Bird. I'm a professor of political science at Clarkson University, and I focus primarily on environmental and energy policy, and I do a lot of work in the Adirondacks, and I'm the academic director for the Adirondack semester at Clarkson as well. Before we begin, I'd like to first acknowledge that the land on which I expect the vast majority of us are sitting on and which we are gathering is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee peoples, especially the Gayen-Gahaga, the Mohawk, and the St. Lawrence Iroquois. And we like to acknowledge and honor that history and of course that reality. Our focus today is really taking a look at community-based action learning and research. And so this is the idea that, I'm sorry, I'm having some interesting, there we go. This is really the idea that, I've just lost my notes, there we go, that universities often will focus and develop partnerships with local communities to do research or to take part in pedagogy learning. We also call this action learning, and there's all sorts of interesting opportunities in terms of doing this. It's real world experience for students. It is the ability to take our research into the real world as opposed to sort of the lab or more stark sort of theory-based kind of research that doesn't really address the kinds of real world problems that you run into in real communities. But there are real challenges in doing this kind of research. And so our panel today is going to focus with both an emphasis on people from the academic side and people from the community side on the kinds of challenges and opportunities that these sorts of things can have. If you have questions today, please put them into the Q&A chat that is part of Zoom. In the Q&A section, you can also use the chat, but as a general rule, we try to use the chat just for quick comments. If you think someone made a great point, etc., that's great. I want to, before we begin, I want to put a big shout out to Mel Johnson. Melanie is our chair of the board for the Adirondack Research Consortium, and Dan Fitz, our president, our long-term president at this point in time, who are both huge advocates for research here in the Adirondacks. The Adirondack Research Consortium focuses specifically on research issues that are relevant and appropriate for the Adirondack Park and for a bit more broadly the North Country in general. Today, our panel, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to just introduce all of them very quickly, and then we'll have 3 short presentations, and then we should have plenty of time for question and answer. So our first presenter is going to be Dr. Liou Xie from SUNY Plattsburgh. She's an associate professor of geography and environmental studies, and she'll be focused primarily on Schuyler Falls regional planning. She'll be followed by Professor Phillip White-Cree, my colleague at Clarkson. He is our coordinator of Indigenous community support and outreach. He's also a professor in history and humanities at Clarkson, and he's also a member of the community of Akwesasne. He will be focused a little bit more on the community side of things, but obviously he has expertise to address both sides of the community academic partnership. They'll be followed then by Dean Dietrich, who's the former chair of the Lake Placid Development Commission and has been involved in planning and development and community issues in the Lake Placid area and the New York Olympic region more broadly for years now, an enormous history contributing to that community. He'll talk a little bit about the variety of different kinds of partnerships that Lake Placid in that area has had with a variety of different kinds of schools. He'll also be joined on occasion by Professor Erik Backus here from Clarkson, who is a professor of civil engineering. Erik is also part of the U.S. Green Building Council and their Lead for Communities program, which was one of the partnerships that Clarkson had with Lake Placid in the New York Olympic regions. So with that, I'm going to stop, and we will shift gears to Professor Liou Xie, and she'll talk about Schuyler Falls. Liou, you're up.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk about the project that me and my colleagues have been working on. Let me share my screen here. Can everyone see a full screen presentation?
Perfect.
Great. Okay, thank you. So this project is a Schuyler Falls comprehensive plan update that we did back in 2017 and until 2019. So it took us about 20 months to complete the project. It was a project that between me and my colleagues and Community Roots. So here is our team that included 3 planners in our department. Dr. Kurt Gervich, me, and Dr. Dan Mills, who has moved on to another university, and also Melissa Levy, who owns a small business called Community Roots, focusing on community and organizational development. So comprehensive plan is usually a type of document that is official, that involves the vision of the community, that's what they want their community to be in the long term. Sometimes, most commonly, we do that 20 years, but this one is 30 years because rural communities usually involve not as fast, rapid growth or change than urban communities. And also, the town was founded in 1848, and we figured it's an awesome title to give to the comprehensive plan update, the bicentennial comprehensive plan. I feel really blessed as a planner because our work is inherently community-based, and we usually embed ourselves within the community that we're working on, and we learn a lot from the communities. and help them develop their vision and develop their action plans for their future. So everything obviously started with a call for proposal of the town of Schuyler Falls that they need an update. The last round was back in 2002, and they figured it was a good time to do a new vision for the community. And in the call for proposal, they do have some ideas of what they want to focus on: land use, transportation, parks and trails, because they do know what kind of assets they have. So we answered the call and we got the job. One of the special thing about this community is that when they came up with this call for proposal, they also put together a planning committee that was formed by the long-term local residents who are concerned and passionate about this work. And the co-chairs, this is why we're lucky, because Phil is a retired senior planner from the town of Plattsburgh. So he knows a lot about planning. And Michael is a engineer, and he also does a lot of projects and work in the planning field. So we do have the really fortunate benefits from the local residents who knows a lot about planning and knows a lot about their community. So here is a map of Schuyler Falls, which you can see the location as compared with Potsdam and Plattsburgh and Lake Champlain. So it's a relatively small rural community surrounded by other towns, about 5,100 people, and is fairly steady, but also very slowly declining. So for the past 10 years, they lost about 100 people. And the total area is about 37 square miles. So if you look at the satellite image, you see a lot of green space. So to the left bottom, you have a land that's mostly state land, that there was some sort of agreement with local indigenous people. So that's a piece of land we cannot really do much with. The first work to do a comprehensive plan is to understand what's going on now, what kind of community the town is. So we looked at the existing land use at that time. You can see the left bottom, the state land. It's largely a residential community, accounting for about 35% of the land. There is a landfill right here that's serving the nearby towns, and they're also taking garbage or trash trucked in from Vermont and even Canada. So that was a big concern of the local community. There was a lot of parks and trails, which they consider really important natural environment, recreational assets for the community. They also have some commercial, but not very much. They don't have grocery stores. They only have some really small convenience stores. So a lot of them have to go out of the town to shop. It's bordering, kind of east part of it is a military turnpike, which has some industries on it. So by looking at the land use, we have a rough idea of how the community is like now, but it's not enough, obviously. We need to go and look at what the town actually looks like. So we have the help of satellite image to see how the residential community looks like. A lot of them are more of large lot residential single family, and also there were 3 hamlets where they embedded in the community, in the town. One here, Woods Mill here, and Schuyler Falls here. So the first thing we did was that we hopped on a van with the planning committee, and we drove around with maps in our hands, and just to see what's actually on the ground and have a better understanding of the community. So we have a lot of passionate local residents who joined us. We learned a lot from them. So that's another fortunate asset we had. And we would stop at important assets, or sometimes they consider as opportunities for future use. And we would sit in one of the committee members' house and have working sessions and brainstorm and reflect on what we have learned and move on to the next work. So there was a lot of public engagement in it. And in the very beginning, we started with a public engagement plan, which we call inform, consult, and involve. So the inform is to build platforms that will always be open to the public for them to gain information, for us to distribute information to the public, to tell them, to inform them what's going on, what we're trying to do, and what the progress are. So in the beginning, we gave a short description of the comprehensive plan, why it's necessary, and the benefits of having a plan. We developed informational article and sent it to the local newspaper, the Sun Times, which is a free one, so that a lot of people in that community still more used to paper reading than internet distribution of information. We set up a Facebook page. We post our updates constantly on the Facebook page. And this is how we got one of the students involved, that she managed the Facebook page and she participated in the project all along. They also have a town website that we post the updates on the town websites too. The consult is really everything that throughout the whole plan, how we involve the community in the vision statement development and also the whole plan development. We began with surveys on SurveyMonkey with print versions because some of them don't use internet. We also joined the local gatherings that are already there. For example, they have fire department pancake breakfast. They already have a lot of people who goes to them. And so we tag along and have discussion with them and spread the information. We organized community leaders and business leaders breakfast to see what they think from their perspective, the future of the community should be. And we organized a series of focused meetings. We call them public charrettes. So that we can have more detailed plan and information gathering from the community, where we would post the session, when it's going to happen, what we're going to focus on, where it's going to happen. So there's a lot of public engagement involved. And in the end, we involve them in terms of reading the final draft of the comprehensive plan, to have the review and comment session, and then we incorporate their comments into our finalized plan. So that's the whole. This is from the very beginning of the project. We followed this plan throughout. We do have a very strong committee that can keep saying. That we have monthly meeting with them, we have roundtable discussions and work on the specific aspect of the plan development. And with their help and with the community involvement, we were able to develop the vision statement, which is the very first step that sets the cornerstone of the project. What's the town wants to achieve in the future? What they consider as their assets, their characteristics, what they want, and what they value in the future that they need for their community, considering their population. And also their desire to develop a partnership with adjacent communities. So based on the vision statement, we had our plan methodology with data supporting our development of plan. We used the SWOT analysis, which is a very commonly used one to help identify the internal strengths and weaknesses and external opportunities and threats of the community. We use scenario planning to help them build their scenarios into the future based on their vision statement, and focused on the main planning themes. So we consistently evaluate the planning themes based on the scenario. So with the help of the public and the committee, we developed 4 scenarios for the community, bedroom community, and each of them we have specific definition. I won't go through details, but there are 4 scenarios. And based on the scenarios, we evaluate their strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats on all these important planning themes, including land uses, business, economic, culture, health and well-being, natural environment, culture, and government and infrastructure. So in the beginning, we were thinking like, of all these scenarios, which way do you want to go? But in the end, we decided that it's better to have a mix of these. For hamlets, we focus on eco-development. For business, we focused on economic gardening and exogenous development. And also, we do have a large percentage of the lands that are residential. So in the end, we have a mixture of all these different scenarios, and we developed the recommendations for all scenarios based on the planning themes. The public engagement of all the series of public charrettes we held, we sent out invitation. Sometimes posting a poster on the website doesn't really reach to all the people we want. So we also printed invitation letters and have the committee members to hand deliver them to their friends and neighbors in the community to invite more people to our charrettes. And of each charrette, we would usually do a short presentation in the beginning so that people who came knew what they were expected to do and what the progress had been at that point. And then we have a lot of maps printed and put around on easels. And we have a lot of sticky notes around. Sticky notes are the best friends when we're doing these public charrettes. To ask them really specific questions. What are your ideas and visions for business, economics, and agriculture? What's your ideas for health and well-being? So we have all these printed maps and posters around and have people write their notes and stick it on individual boxes that we had. So these questions, usually we try to make them very specific so people know exactly what they do. And we also post information like who are on the planning committee so that when they see familiar names, they feel more comfortable speaking up. And also later on, if they thought of something else they want to add, they know who to turn to. So the public charrettes, not only for us to gather community opinions, but also for us to distribute our information. So we'll ask them, for example, could you help us track the diversity of the input, especially in terms of, where you're from, what's your neighborhood, what's your place of employment, if you have some particular ideas or concerns for a specific location, could you put a sticky note on that location on the map? In terms of the 6 planning themes, we have 1 map for each of them. For example, natural environment, what's the asset? What are the concerns? What do you think should be the action plan for the future? Or health and well-being, what's the asset? What's the concern? And the important actions to take. So we gather a lot of information. We take pictures throughout the night so that we don't lose any notes. And we ask other questions and put maps that are specific, for example, environmental and recreational resources. We put on parks and trails, rivers and water surfaces, wetlands and forests to help people identify, to trigger their thoughts about where their ideas. And besides sticky notes, we also designed a lot of interactive hands-on exercises that it's easy for people who may not even have any idea of what planning is. So this example is using Lego building blocks, different colors, meaning different land use or building types. For example, yellow being residential, red being commercial, So we have explanation for that. So people say, if you want a residential, commercial, or infrastructure being built here, put this building block here. So with multiple people, we see that multiple ideas, and you can see some are obviously built hotspots for buildings. And if you see multiple colors, they want to have multiple use of development for that location. So exercise like this also triggers people's interest and passion and their ideas to, and we took pictures of that map throughout the night so that we keep the ideas. So the main point of public engagement is really to incorporate their ideas and into our final version of plan, and gradually throughout the process, we developed the spatial dynamic of the community, which is kind of cross-checked with people's opinion. Also, we're trying to educate the community to our work. So for example, for Schuyler Falls, neighboring the town of Plattsburgh, which is a major, on this side of the town of Plattsburgh, they have a lot of industrial development. And for kind of encroaching into Schuyler Falls, but there was a abandoned railroad bed right across at the border here that kind of functions as ecological buffer between the town and the industrial development. So over time, we really learn from the community, and then we educate the community too. All right, a few last slides. In the end, we realized that having really big chunk of texts, paragraphs, might not be easy for people to read, but if we put them in really clean slated tables, it's more readable for the community and easy for them to find what they are interested in and what the action plans are. So we put our conclusions in tables. These are the 6 planning themes and key opportunities and threats. The plan, our recommendation, we have summarized table, and then we have individual specific recommendations based on the summary, what they are and what the intended outcomes are. Some of them are more short-term goals, some of them are mid-term and long-term. So we also separate all these detailed recommendations in terms of the terms of achievements. And we also developed indicators, because for planner to be implemented, we also want to monitor it. So we have indicators for specific themes, and then what we need to do in the future 1 year, 3 to 5 years, and 8 to 10 years. So these are the work we did with Schuyler Falls. All right, I'm gonna wrap up in two sentences. The work I'm working now as a planner, again, really deeply embedded in the community, is a bridge to be built between Plattsburgh and Burlington. So if you know something about Plattsburgh, now it's connected by the gap over Lake Champlain with ferries. That is not stable and really expensive for people, and that's not reliable, that for this past winter, there were quite few closures. So this is the next one I'm working on. So thank you. Sorry that I went over time.
No, that's great. Thank you very much, Liou. Just as a reminder to everybody, feel free to throw questions in. We're going to do all of the questions at the end after all 3 presentations. So I'm going to shift quickly to Phillip White-Cree. And he'll talk about some of the Akwesasne experience and his experiences as well. Thanks, Phillip.
Phillip White-Cree. So here to talk about Indigenous style. So this isn't my phrasing. This is actually a book from Gregory, and I'll mention it in a moment. So generally speaking, when you start anything from Haudenosaunee perspective, is we do the Ahundagali, which literally means the words that are said before all outs. This is a framing reference, and it helps with a lot of conflict resolution, because it reminds everybody that no matter what is said or done here, the rest of the world continues to move. And so I think this is way, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but I'm at least going to show you like the thought process of when you're engaging with Indigenous mindset, there's going to be usually different protocols and approaches to how things should be happening. So generally we say, Akwesasne did what we knew, and it just means we bring all our minds together as one and we greet the people, the earth, the waters, the fish, the plants, the fruits, medicine plants, food plants, animals, trees, birds, four winds, thunders, the sun, the moon, the stars, the four messengers, and then divine creation. So that's how we frame things and how we put things to kind of reframe people's thinking, especially when you're going into engaging. And so for Haudenosaunee perspective, this is like paramount protocol. So that would be said. Then I would usually introduce myself. So Phillip White-Cree, Lohetio, I'm from the Turtle Clan, from Akwesasne, part of the Mohawk Nation, Haudenosaunee. But my role at Clarkson University is coordinator of Indigenous community support and outreach under the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office. And I'm also an instructor of history, specializing in Indigenous history within the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. So I do have quite a few hats and roles and things. And so for anybody who needs to understand where Akwesasne is, it is as most northern part of New York you can get, while still having a foot in New York and a foot in Canada. And we like to show that off quite a bit. So we are right at the St. Lawrence, and I'll describe that in a moment. We do our case study in Akwesasne as to like why that is, and why when people come to our community, particularly in Akwesasne, they have a hard time understanding the realities, social political realities of our community, and how engagement and consultation takes on a whole new level. So I'm going to first introduce Elements of Indigenous Style by Gregory Youngin. Unfortunately, he has passed, but he basically started this whole discussion as to how should researchers or anybody in general engage with Indigenous people, and how that methodology should be very cultural sensitive. And so I highly invite everybody to get a copy of his book if you can, if you want to engage with Indigenous peoples in any regard, whether writing or otherwise researching. It's invaluable. So he describes that Indigenous style really is framing that it reflects Indigenous realities as they are perceived by Indigenous people presently, truthfully, insightfully, and respectfully to the cultural integrity of Indigenous people. And he had an understanding that Indigenous identity is diverse, it continues to exist, is not assimilated, is in a process of cultural revitalization, natural change, and adaptation. So there's a lot of, I made a joke about this earlier, is I generally have to break people's mindset of Indigenous lives beyond 1890. In history books and everything that we've been told by media, there seems to be this wall of 1890. Anything before then is more authentically Indigenous as opposed to anything after that. I will tell you that my great-grandfather, who was a farmer who only spoke Mohawk, he made it up to, I think, the 8th grade of education. He loved his tractor. And you wouldn't perceive that as like Indigenous man on a tractor. Well, he's a farmer. He wants to, maintain his farming potatoes and dairy cows. So the whole idea of like respecting Indigenous cultural properties. If you are shown something, talk to them, working in collaboration. So there has been a lot of abuses in academia and other areas where they've gone in, taken that information and taken it out, and not going back and respecting the authority of elders, traditional knowledge keepers, and oral traditions. Terminology is very important. His book goes through quite a bit of it, so I'm just going to touch on it here lightly. But basically, the names of Indigenous people, it should be what they call themselves. So for me, Haudenosaunee is the big, broad people of the Longhouse. Kanien'kehá:ka is what we call ourselves from the outside, which is known as Mohawk Nation. It refers to us as people of the Flint. Excuse me, and capitalization to show respect for proper names and identities and rights. So this happens a lot where I always get told, oh, well, you're capitalizing too many things. I said, no, like this is a proper title. These are proper things to show. And to also go through when your consultation or a meeting even is to show proper and respect for trauma. You do not talk about things in an academic sense that is sounding as if the person or the experience you're discussing is not in the room. And I assure you, Indigenous people are everywhere. I go to vacation in Rome and I met somebody from Akwesasne. So like we get around. So this idea of like, just because you feel that you're safe in an ivory tower of some sort, no, expect that whoever you're discussing is probably in the room as well. And it is also good practice to be very sensitive of your words and usage. So the approach, do no more harm. Also using English words from an Indigenous source. Again, take the time to create a glossary in a context and avoid inappropriate possessives. So it's not United States Indigenous people, it should be viewed as the Indigenous people of the United States. And I do teach a history class where it's an Indigenous people's history of New York State. Beware of reusing inappropriate cultural material already published. So I would say generally anything before 1992 should be suspect for being things that were inappropriately absorbed into the academia or institutions, and really should go back to an Indigenous expertise from that people to tell you whether or not this is proper. There's quite a bit from the Haudenosaunee that has been out there that really should not be, and I deal with that consistently. If there's historical translations, by all means do that. Indigenous language translations is also paramount. If you want to engage with all sectors of Indigenous people, do take the time to properly acknowledge and compensation for a translator, and ensure that any translations from Indigenous source are properly cited and methodology in case. Also, avoid writing in the past tense. Indigenous people are still here, still alive, still doing things. So this is where Gregory Young goes into quite a much of detail. So just a bunch of inappropriate terms and phrases that most people catch themselves on, such as burying the hatchet, low man on the totem pole, off the reservation. All of these have a very strong context of trying to dehumanize Indigenous people. And moving forward, these are things that everyone should strive to kind of reject and stop saying. There's also proper terminology. So I'm not going to go through all of this here, but just to be aware that generally speaking in North America, when you say Indigenous, it is a global context. So if you say Indigenous of North America, you're putting it more specific. In Canada, there's a tendency to say First Nation, or in the US, First American. Proper to be used over tribal identification. Some groups identify as a Haudenosaunee term. It can mean several different communities. And then the tribe does have a very loaded sense of identity, which is very specific and deals with a lot of outsiders telling us who we are. Generally try to be specific to an Indigenous identity or nation and not be generic. If the word or phrase that you're saying doesn't sound right, if you replaced it with European and it sounds a little awkward, then it might be suspect to try to be more specific to who you're addressing. Indigenous man, Indigenous woman. In the legal front, we are seeing avoid using the terminology such as artifact. Most people love to say artifacts because in their mindset, they feel artifacts come from the ground and they belong in a museum. This is very problematic when you're dealing with law, because judges are now being clued in to say that we refer to it as a belonging, an ancestral belonging. Oh, so this belongs to you as opposed to belonging to a museum. Avoiding words such as discovered. It should really be, when people met, they exchange or contact. And rather than saying the new world, last I checked, the whole world is of the same age. It is just really the Western Hemisphere. Also, we'll say, when it comes to when you're dealing with individual nations and names, Dene over Navajo, Haudenosaunee instead of Iroquois, Saita instead of Haida. So then this is where you need to do your own homework. And I will say Google is a brilliant resource to be able to find a lot of who you should be talking to and how you should be engaging. There's my sources for that section. So I'm just going to run through quickly Akwesasne as a case study. born and raised in Akwesasne. It refers to a place where the partridge drums. So on our western entry into the community on Route 37, we have this sign that was put up. It's supposed to be a partridge. If anybody knows their proper birdage, it is actually the eastern woodland grouse, which is about yay big. And they like to make a 3D representation that shows it almost like a turkey size. So I do have my own reservations about that particular 3D representation, but it does try to reflect that Akwesasne, meaning where the partridge drums, the eastern woodland grouse, the male fluffs his feather and ruffles it, and it sounds very much like almost a motorcycle revving up or a two-stroke engine. So for us, we have heritage to the St. Lawrence Iroquois and also the Haudenosaunee proper, which is down in more central New York regions. And we have a combination of understanding in pre-contact sense, the creation story, foundation of the earth, clan story, our relation to each other and kinship. And then there's a political difference. So culturally similar, politically different, just like you would insult a Canadian by calling them an American. You can say North American, but not necessarily an American, and vice versa. Most Americans don't like to be called a Canadian if they're abroad. And for us, contact really appears from several different years. So 1609 is the first one with the French. Samuel de Champlain comes in, he sees a big giant body of water, and as he does with all good explorers, he names it after himself, and we were there. And so 1609, he brought guns into the equation, gave it to our enemies. And so shortly thereafter, we have a good new buddy from the south, the Dutch, and we invite their guns. And so they become our friends in 1610. And then 1660s, the English start influencing, taking over New Amsterdam, the American identity, 1776. And then internally, we had a cultural revitalization in 1799 with Handsome Lake. So he brings in a way to revise. Oh, there's something in the chat. Yeah, so thank you for that. I'm just about wrapping up. Canadian identity in 1867. So Akwesasne is bordered between US and Canada. Boundaries come in, long story short. British and US believe that the boundary should be at the 45th parallel, running into the middle of St. Lawrence and splitting the river in half all the way up into the Great Lakes. Sounds good on paper. Unfortunately, my community was there, and we get bisected by all these lines and people deciding which island goes to whom. And Quebec, Ontario, New York all have a stake. And so the community develops as having multi-identities, multifaceted. So there's a lot of community growth in the 2000s. There's sports and recreation. There's leadership. We have this Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, who is the Canadian elected council, deals mostly with Canadian officials. St. Regis Mohawk Tribe, the U.S. elected council, who deals mostly with the U.S. and New York State. And then we have a traditional revitalized council, the Mohawk Nation Council of Chiefs, and they have a lot of weight and clout behind tradition. So all three have leadership. And so when a person says they're a chief, it could be any number. MCA has 12, the tribe has 6 elected, and nation has 9. So there's a lot of, you need to do your homework as to whom are you talking to and trying to understand the community. And we are a growing community. So we've had the fire department, police force on both sides that work together, water line, our own internet fiber optic system. We even have Akwesasne TV. So like, we are not something living in the dark ages. We are very much present. And because of that, we're very much attached to social movements from 2009, I Don't Know More, Standing Rock, and even shut down Canada during 2020. So we have a very vast identity and connection with the environment. So when a person says they're talking to somebody from Akwesasne, you need to be very much aware of, are you going about it in a meaningful way that's a comprehensive way of talking to every different group and party? So questions. My name's Phillip White-Cree, Coordinator Indigenous Community Support and Instructor of History. And I think just for time, we're going to probably have to move on.
Yeah, what I'll do is we'll open up to questions after Dean has talked a little bit about Lake Placid's experience. And so, Dean, I'm going to bump straight to you, and then we'll open it up to questions. And people should feel free to, we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. Feel free to throw them in there. Dean Dietrich, you're on.
Thank you, and I'll try to keep it short. I have an eye on the time right there, and my job, I think, was to just talk about a community perspective. And as a community person, I've been involved with a few projects which have involved students primarily, and we've seen some strengths and weaknesses from that. The way I got involved with student projects is that I had the honor of being the chair of the Community Development Commission from 2014 to this January of 2022. The Development Commission really came out of a comprehensive plan. Leo referred to a comprehensive plan. In 2014, we did not want our comprehensive plan just to sit on the shelf. So we organized a group of volunteers whose job was to actually go forth and help create partnerships to implement some of the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. And that's what we've been involved with. In 2014, we decided, hey, one way to do that would be to partner up with a university, and particularly get university kids. They're fairly cheap, they do good work. We'll get some university students to do work for us. And since 2014, we have partnered with Clarkson University. Dr. Backus is here, Dr. Bird is here, in a number of projects. We partnered with Cornell, particularly the Cornell Institute of Public Affairs. We've partnered with Paul Smith's, their surveying course, to get some things done there. We are establishing a partnership now with Skidmore, their arts class. I'll get into that a little bit more. Their art is going to help us in terms of developing some strategies for incorporating art into the community. As I look at all those projects, I'll give you some details of them as we move along, but as we look at all the projects as a community, we can look at basically a continuum of how we can use the resources of an Institute of Higher Learning. On one side, we need a specific thing done. So the Cornell Institute of Public Affairs, for instance, we went to them and said, hey, what we really want is a marketable map, a consumer map of all the trails, in the community trails. We have 7 or 8 community trails. We would like a consumer map of those, and we'd like to tell people how we can, go to our marketing people and explain how other communities market those trails. Very specific thing. And now, if you go to a hotel in Lake Placid, you can say, I want to take my family on a hike. They can pop out this little booklet of 8 trails. I want to go up Cobble. They print out that page, and you got a map. Dr. Backus is there. We wanted to do a GIS mapping of the electrical system. And so we developed an internship with Clarkson University. We got a GIS mapping of the of the electrical system, which of course is being used to track maintenance. In terms of another thing that we did with Clarkson was I guess this is more of the next step. Next year, we just talked about it yesterday. We know we want sidewalks on 2 different areas in Lake Placid. Well, let's get a preliminary engineering study of those 2 sidewalks. We will know then how much they cost, or the approximate number of how much they cost, so we can get grants, so we can lever that to grants. We ask for, so what we get from these specific projects is a specific deliverable that is useful. In some cases, it's actually been a visual. So one group of Clarkson students did a visual, a master plan for a park, Power Pond Park, and they could do an animation of a flyover the park that no one in the community could do. Would have cost us a lot of money, but now we can take a look at that and kind of use that as a jumping off point for discussion, which brings to mind, is my clever segue to the other part of that continuum. We have used student projects as a jumping off point to stimulate community discussion and to kind of energize the community. Community development is all about energizing the forces that are available. If you can't get people behind community development, it's just not going to develop. And usually you have people out there that want to do things. They just got to see how it can be done. And that gets people excited, it gets people involved, and you move forward. The best example of that is one we did with the Cornell Institute of Public Affairs. We wanted, the comprehensive plan calls for incorporating art into the community. We had a group of students did a report. This is how other communities around the country incorporate art. This is the structure they use, this is the money they use, these are the considerations they have when they create their arts master plan. And then we had them present to the 5 major stakeholders or the artistic community. So as they presented that then to the Art Center and the Film Institute and the Sinfonietta and the Historic Society, there's one other, I'm an old man, it's never going to come to me. After their presentation to that particular group and other people that were interested in art, in bringing art into the community, the question was, this is what other communities do. Are you guys interested in doing that? And lo and behold, about 3 months later, we now have an Arts Alliance, which is supported by the town board, the village board. They have their own bylaws, they have their own, and they're moving forward with projects to have students paint on sidewalks. To Skidmore is partly coming up now. They're going to do a inventory of all the Olympic statues, what needs to be fixed, what's the best way to fix it, perhaps where it should be moved to in the long run. And so the arts, this whole discussion that was generated from a report from graduate students has just blossomed into a very very exciting kind of initiative that's taking place in Lake Placid. We are now working on leads with Dr. Backus, and I don't know, Erik, I want to give you some time here, but basically what we're going to do is leverage leads. It's kind of a combination of the two as I made this continuum between specifics and discussion. It's just like every continuum, it's spurious. It's the middle ground, which is the key. And the leads are specific information that we want to leverage into community discussion. And Erik, you want to take 30 seconds?
Yeah,
and talk
so
about that?
quick thing. So Lead for Communities is a program by the U.S. Green Building Council, as Dr. Bird introduced in the front end of the conversation today. And it provides a framework for communities to engage in a planning process that goes across a spectrum of things. So LEAD stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. But if you look at the system Lead for Communities, it's branching into, social factors, economic factors, and so on. How do you think about planning your community? And it provides really a set of questions and a framework that ask either really specific things like, what do you want to do with this particular park and how does that support you, to the broader questions of how do you make sure that you have an educated workforce, or how do you ensure that your children have a brighter future. And so we've been working with, we actually did a certification process to get them started in 2018, 2019, which led to LEED Gold certification for the community. But what's important is less the certification, more that the process has led to them being able to examine themselves in a way that actually brings forward new ideas, but also lets them know where they're at so they know where to go to next and start asking what are the gaps. And I think as Dean has articulated, there's a spectrum there, that some are big programmatic, big questions that need to be about engagement with the community and where their goals and desires are. Some are very specific about certain projects and activities. And it's been a great mechanism, our part, to help them figure out where they want to go and do it. It doesn't have to all be Clarkson. It's great when we engage partners at Skidmore, Paul Smith College, certainly Cornell, as well as others. And I think we're going to start seeing that down the road. Hopefully our SUNY Plattsburgh partners will soon be a part of some of this activities where it makes sense that your expertise can be leveraged and so on. And some of this is student projects, but really it comes together having a comprehensive approach to how you might want to do this. And I think that's where Dean's been the great collector for that, because he's been seeing that bigger picture of what the community needs and where it wants to go for its goals and desires.
Thank you, Erik. And I know I want to leave at least 5 minutes for questions, but I would like to just go over and some of the, in my 10 years or 8 years or 20, I guess it started in 1982. In my years with working with students and projects that involve with planning, there are some strengths and weaknesses, I think, and some issues. One of the things that strikes me, if you're from an institution or a student, is that the contact is kind of random. In 2014, I wrote letters to 15 universities. What we want to do is move forward and establish this partnership. I have to say, not a lot responded. I think that landscape has changed a little bit because of the economic development zones where a university has to get involved. But the contact is somewhat random. We're starting our comprehensive plan, and I do remember working with Plattsburgh, not in this life, but in a previous life as a teacher, working with Plattsburgh, planning to create teacher centers. I don't know if there was a thing that kind of came and went. So I understand that Plattsburgh is there, but now I know from this presentation that we're firing up a comprehensive plan. You know, I should send Plattsburgh a letter. I didn't know that before this. So the contacts are a little random, and it'd be kind of nice to have some way to make the contacts less random. Once you contact, who you contact is key. And I think Leo pointed that out. She was fortunate she had some planners. I mean, consultants are only as good as their clients, and the product is only as good as the consultant. And so you need, you know, and a lot of times communities, from our perspective, don't have the contact people that can do that. The mayor and in many of our opportunities, the mayor and the town supervisor are 100% supportive of the effort. They just don't have the time or the resources to actually put it into it. I think city managers are sometimes a little reluctant because they're giving up some control. So, you know, it becomes the contact person and who you work with becomes a little bit of a problem. And if you recognize that going in, I think you're better off. One of the things that we get from our side is we get a whole range of quality of projects. Dr. Backus, Dr. Bird, kind of make sure that the quality of project is there. The same for Cornell, the Cornell institution, the quality of project is there. Sometimes not so much. And then you just got to kind of say, well, we helped the kids learn. We got something out of it. It was a nice experience. Everybody go home. So that's a little bit of an issue. And there is, last point I will make, there is a little disparity of goals. We are a community and we're looking for a project or a particular report. If most of the time we are working with students, it is part of a larger curriculum. So for instance, when Erik, I know he has his kids work very hard on a section of an engineering report that has all these statistics and all these references to all these government resources and government requirements. And I just kind of flip through that 100 pages and throw it away. Who cares? And get down to the nitty gritty. And so there is that issue. And the other thing about one last point, sorry, Steve, one of the last points about working with students is there is a quick turnover. And Phillip talked about that. You got to be aware of the culture. And Lee talked about that also. You have to be aware of what Schuyler Falls is. And, you know, we have been quite fortunate. We've had the same contact person, Rebecca, Professor Morgenstern at Cornell for 10 years now. And we had the same contact people from Clarkson. The others have kind of come and gone. And the semester is by nature a chunk. And so they work a chunk and they just get a feel for the community and then they move on. And that continuity is a little bit difficult. Having said all that, I don't want to end on the negative notes. I want to go back to the positive things. We have gained so much from the partnerships we've had with higher institutions. I don't think we'll ever abandon them. Just in the case of meeting the students and meeting the people, it's just been a wonderful experience. And so just in the sense of we just had a good time, I would just say it was worth the time, effort, and energy. So I spoke really, really fast. I didn't have enough coffee. I could have spoken faster if I had more coffee. But,
That's great.
I'll give you a couple minutes for questions, and I'll be happy to, if anybody, I would be one who would be willing to stay on if somebody wants to ask questions. So I'll leave it at that. Steve, it's yours.
Absolutely.
Dr. Bird, I'm sorry.
No, that was great. And thank you to all our presenters. I really appreciated the whole diversity of perspectives there. I'm going to throw it back to both Leo and Phillip for just a second. Two quick questions. If we can keep them quick, we'll probably go about 5 minutes extra here, but folks need to leave at 11. We understand that. But for Leo, one of the questions I had was, for you as an academic, how did the Schuyler Falls planning process affect your research agenda? Did you involve students in any way, shape, or form? And then sort of on the other side of things, and this is a question for Phillip, in terms of Akwesasne's more recent experiences, I'm aware of at least 3 or 4 different academics who have worked in partnership with the Akwesasne community or with the St. Regis community or variations thereof. And so, my question is, do you see any of those as working pretty well? And if so, why? What was the thing about it that worked so well about partnering with Akwesasne? But Liou, you go first and maybe talk a little bit about Schuyler.
Yeah, I have to say that as a planner, a lot of my work had been focused on Asian cities. And I was working on big cities like Wuhan, Shanghai, and so the Schuyler Falls was really one of the very first and also the important one that really pulled me back into embedded in my extended community where I physically am now and probably for long term. The planning methodology, a lot of the methods can be easily transferred from my previous work. The main learning process for me is really learning about how rural community works and what are their major assets, what their visions are, what they want for their community, what's most important. And obviously density is a huge difference between my previous work. So it was also a learning process for me to adapt to the local, more rural context. And in terms of student involvement, obviously it was really, we had a student with us throughout the project who not only managed the Facebook page, but also went to all the public shreds and helped us out with all these public engagement. And some of the writing, but most of the writing was still done by the professors or the 3 planners we had. But the student had the opportunity to really go talk to the community, the residents, learn about the local context, learn about the whole process of comprehensive planning. So that was a really, when I was talking to her, she said that was a huge learning process for her. So yeah, doing this locally really makes it much easier to engage our students in the research.
That's great. And Phillip, what about the Akwesasne experience?
I think the only time that I've seen a really successful consultation or engagement has been when a person comes in and basically says, okay, who should I be talking to? And they engage with all 3, the nation, MCA, and the tribe. So that's our shorthand for the 3 different leadership, and letting them all know, because each one will have someone you should be talking to. And then those become your people in the community that you discuss. And I think that's where I was able to help a PhD candidate complete his work because he went to the nation, and I was there for another reason, but I was able to help and facilitate. So I think that's where meaningful dialogue happens, when you do go outside of your comfort zone and do an outreach to as many parties as you can. Because I would say the shorthand in Akwesasne is 9 out of 10 of us agree on any one thing. So you need to basically go out there and try to get that wide net of people. And once you talk to one person, you should ask them, so who else should I be talking to? Because if one person says, oh no, I'm the only one you should be talking to, that's when you should cause a few red flags right there. And I think that goes with any Indigenous group that you're really discussing, is that there's going to be multiple perspectives from multiple people. And it's just going to be an ever-growing field, especially with academia reaching out to Indigenous communities and really having them as being partnership and collaborative, as opposed to coming in and saying, this is how you should change things for the better. It's like, no, you should be helping us to get as a partnership.
Yeah. So it's that question of actually really understanding the community you're going to work with. Dean, I'm curious, in terms of the Lake Placid experience, has there been any particular times when Lake Placid has really, where it just felt like it hasn't worked? And if so, what were the drivers of that? Where just didn't get the kinds of outputs or the kinds of hoped for outcomes that you were expecting?
Yeah, there was.
You don't have to name names or schools.
No, we were very interested in getting something which basically, because we have the FISU games coming, and the housing group was very interested in making sure. Now I'm thinking about it, it was partially successful in making sure that how do you transition the housing for the athletes, which is going to be built for the FISU games, the university games in 2023, into affordable housing, which is an issue. And so we did have a group it was okay, I won't name it, that took a very deep dive into Vancouver, and the Vancouver Olympics did the exact same thing. And the question was, how many single family bedrooms, how much, how do you transfer, and what is the process you use to figure out what's the best design so you can change the configuration of the apartment, and how does it move? And in the long run, it was good because it really established a baseline and a goal that we are going to have to do this, and it's possible. So we established that. A lot of the work that went into that was not used. I thought there were some really good ideas in terms of design, and that basically has to do with what Phillip just referred to. Is that we have a couple of different entities in Lake Placid. As you know, the culture, we have the Olympic Regional Development Agency, which answers to the state. We have Roost, which answers to the region in general, and then we have the Lake Placid Village and the Lake Placid Town Board. And there was Orta got a developer, and they just kind of went their own direction. So it wasn't as successful as I wanted, just because we couldn't get the 3 units together. But it wasn't totally unsuccessful because it did cement the idea that, yeah, you can take this athlete housing and turn it into community housing, and here is a place where it can happen. Sorry.
And there are certainly some significant housing issues in the Lake Placid area. That's great. Well,
we're going to end up with about 300 units of affordable housing based on that, which is pretty cool.
Which is great. Yeah. I'm just want to say we're happy to stay on. At least I don't want to speak for the rest of my panelists, but I'm more than happy to stay on and answer further questions. But we are at 11:05. I want to thank everyone involved, all of our panelists, Dean, Erik, Phillip, and Liou, and also Melanie and Dan in the ARC, and also Paul Smith's College, which sponsors this series, and we're very appreciative. So we're happy to take on more questions if our panelists can stay on for a couple more minutes, but if people need to go, just wanted to say thank you. This panel has been recorded. We have a YouTube channel, and Mel Johnson has just put that in the chat, and we're happy to take on any other questions.
And I'd like to, if I may, just remind everyone to join us next week for our last webinar on citizen science. So tools for community-based science. So at the same time, please join us for that.
Thanks, Mel. I forgot to mention that. That's great. I have one question here. I just lost it. Steve Langdon, who's taught in my Adirondacks semester, has asked this question. How do we get academics to engage with the more remote, the less resourced, smaller communities that we see in the North Country and in the Adirondacks? Where and how do they deal with the reach out? So Lake Placid is arguably the richest, most affluent area within the Adirondacks. And I can imagine the same kind of context thinking about that in a situation with Indigenous communities where, larger ones are more resourced, a little bit more well-connected, and others might be much more isolated. So I wonder, for our panelists, any thoughts on how to get smaller, less advantaged communities connected with the academic community to do this kind of partnership work?
Yeah, I typed the responses why I kind of disappeared for you, Steve. And so I'll take a first hit at it, and then I'm sure others may want to chime in as well. It really depends upon the vehicle and mechanism of how it works. So for instance, I'm doing some work right now with Brazier, which is a smaller town in the North Country, and Madrid. I've also done projects. I was actually working on starting a project with St. Regis Falls, which is one of the communities that Stephen specifically mentioned in his comment. Part of it was finding a partner that would help them. So for instance, one of the things that New York State did is they put out a grant program for active transportation, encouraging people to do more walking and things like that under the auspices, not of engineering, not of humanities or planning, but under the auspices of health. So public health agencies, actually, in this case, so the Healthy Network in Franklin County, where they were willing to say, hey, we can help sponsor support of a community looking at how to improve walking infrastructure, sidewalks, something that Dean was just mentioning that we're going to be looking at doing for them. And said, hey, we would front it. But really the key was getting local leadership to say, hey, they're very interested in doing this and having the engagement with that. And so they happened to reach out to me because I've been doing this kind of work with communities at Lake Placid, but elsewhere to try to get that off the ground a little bit. And so one of the vehicles to get academics is there a student project that comes out of that, meaning a classroom type activity? And we've done projects that way. Sometimes they've been internship opportunities. In my case, I'm a professor of practice, so I'm kind of a different animal than a traditional faculty member at a university. So my role is to do practice, which is in this case planning and infrastructure development for communities. So that's kind of what I do. So it worked really well to develop internships where students do the work through my guidance, and that's how that worked. And then, the last, of course, is it could be a research project where you're trying to understand, for instance, the housing challenge that Dean brought up is not unique to Lake Placid. It's a challenge for a lot of places. How do we get affordable housing for different communities? And it could be a research project where you partner with an academic for, an NSF grant or National Humanities, Institute for Humanities grant to see what might be available to do something like that, to get some funding, to do some help to do something like that. So those are a couple ideas. And again, the first two are the ones that I'm very familiar with, and that's what I've done a lot of work with to help communities, not just Lake Placid, but really small communities that are extremely under-resourced for their efforts.
And I'm just going to jump on that. The easiest ones that we've had is when the graduate student says, I have to do a capstone project, and the terminology is different from everybody else. And can I do this? So right now we have a student, we're going to do a series of interviews actually, and pick a student. We have a competition for it, who's going to do a capstone project on community daycare. There's a lot of money coming down the pike for daycare. We're trying to figure out how we can leverage that money, and how we can get our stakeholders together. So we were, if academics encourage their graduate students to actually do field research and do that, it helps. The big bugaboo is money. We don't, it's the resources. Even I laugh when Lake Placid is referred to as rich, because with the tax cap, we don't have any resources. And so we have to do things, be creative to do things. And a lot of times with Erik, we've sometimes put it, we can't afford an intern. Can we do it as a class project? I said, okay, we'll do this as a class project. This one we can afford an intern, we'll do the intern. But having a student who does it, what we do is in-kind services. They stay in my basement. We figure out someplace they can stay. We try to get them an office so we can do in-kind services, but it's very difficult to get money.
Yeah, you certainly have to get creative. I think we're hitting just about 11:10 right now. So I'll encourage folks to get in touch with ARC or with me or any of the panelists directly. We're all pretty easy to find on Google. I'll finish up with one last sort of quick commentary. One of the things that I've seen in this sort of research community-based partnership is it's just so critical for academics and researchers to take the time to understand the community with which they're engaging, and to understand who the real players are, and to approach these things not as though you're approaching a lab or your research question, but to remember that you're dealing with a set of people who are living their lives. Respect is just absolutely critical, and it takes longer. And at the same time, of course, communities are dealing with their own timelines, and they're not the academic timelines. So I think lots of times academics have lots to adjust in terms of doing this sorts of engagement, but it can be really beneficial on the research side of things. And if it's done well, it can be a great experience for the communities as well. And you don't want to miss those lost opportunities. So I'll wrap us up there. Again, thank you to all our panelists, to Phillip, to Erik, to Liou, to Dean, and to the ARC and Paul Smiths. Thanks, everybody. Much appreciated.